Welcome. This is History Theory, and today we discuss the question, what if the Fourth Crusade never happened? But before we think about what might have happened, we have to think about what really happened. In the late 12th century, many Western European nations became obsessed with the conquest of the Holy Land, and specifically the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was, and still is, a holy city for Christians, which most people from Western European nations were at the time. However, during this time, Jerusalem was under the control of Muslim Egypt. This began the Crusades, in which European forces sought to conquer the Levant, and in many cases they were successful. However, in the year 1202 CE, things began to go awry. In 1202, the latest Crusader army traveling towards the Holy Land sacked the Catholic city of Zara along the way, which led to the Pope to excommunicate the entire force. The army continued towards Jerusalem, but stopped in the famous and glorious city of Constantinople, the capital of the Orthodox Christian Byzantine Empire, also known as the Eastern Roman Empire, which had been around for almost a century since the year 330 CE. The army was convinced to lead a coup for a Byzantine prince in exchange for Byzantine aid and payment. However, when the said prince was assassinated, having failed to take the throne for himself, the Crusader army was left with no payment, no supplies, or any help from the Byzantines. They then chose to invade and sack the city of Constantinople for themselves in what would be known as the Fourth Crusade, plundering it of its riches and wealth and sowing mass chaos. The vast majority of the Crusaders didn't even make it to the Holy Land. The once all-powerful Byzantine Empire quickly entered a period of destructive disunity and civil wars, which eventually led to the empire's decline and collapse. The weakened Byzantine Empire would be replaced by the Ottoman Empire, which would profit immensely from the ruins of Byzantium. But what if the Crusader army hadn't attacked Constantinople at all? What if the Fourth Crusade never happened? The Byzantine Empire would have remained strong and powerful. Greek and Byzantine influence and culture would continue to flourish as it had for the past 900 years. All the innocent lives that were lost in the Fourth Crusade would not have been, and the relative peace would have endured in the city of Constantinople. The Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church would never have had this brutal cause for conflict and division, and perhaps relations between the two would not have been as sour and resentful as they ended up becoming. On that note, as the vast majority of the Orthodox Christian community lived in the Byzantine Empire, the faith would have remained stronger and more influential than it did, especially compared to the Roman Catholic Church. The rise of the Turkish Ottoman Empire would have been much more gradual, if it would have happened at all, as the Ottoman Empire came to power very much in part due to the instability of the Byzantine Empire. Who knows what would have happened in regards to that? Perhaps the Ottoman uprising would have been quelled by the Byzantine armies, or perhaps the Ottoman Empire would have been limited to Anatolia and the Middle East. The Ottomans might not have expanded their territory into southern Europe as it did most prominently. After all, at their height, the Ottomans did control almost all of the Balkan Peninsula, and in this scenario, Ottoman influence in Europe would likely have almost been non-existent. Ottoman involvement in World War I, if the conflict had happened at all, would have been extremely minor. Perhaps the Ottoman Empire, limited to the Middle East, would have lasted well into the 20th century if it had not joined the Central Powers. European countries might not have ever set foot in the Middle East either. Perhaps the brutal Israel-Palestine conflict could have been avoided entirely if Britain never set foot in the Levant. And if all this had been the case, the Byzantines could have remained in control of the southeastern corner of Europe for many more centuries. The Ottomans ruled over that area for 800 years. Why couldn't the Byzantine Empire have? Perhaps the legacy of Rome in the form of the Byzantines would have continued and prospered far into the industrial and even the modern era. The nation-state of Greece might have had a very different history. Who knows, maybe the Byzantine Empire would have continued in its place. The kingdom of the Byzantines could have lasted to be a modern nation, a constitutional monarchy perhaps, similar to other European nations that still exist today. The Fourth Crusade definitely affected the history of Southern Europe and the world around it forever afterwards, and inevitably helped end the Roman nation once and for all. This has been History Theory. Subscribe for more content, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.